There are things you tell people without ever opening your mouth. You tell them in what you tolerate, in how quickly you answer, in how many times you forgive the same wound. In the moments when someone crosses a line and you quietly move the line farther away, hoping they will finally learn to respect you, people are always watching. Not always with cruelty, not always consciously, but they are learning from you. They are learning what you will accept. They are learning whether your makes you stay. They are learning whether your no means no, or whether it is simply the beginning of another negotiation. And sometimes, the most painful lesson is realizing that people may not be treating you according to the worth you possess, but according to the worth you have taught them to recognize. You may be extraordinary and still accept ordinary treatment. You may be deeply valuable and still keep returning to places that make you question your value. You may have a beautiful heart and still hand that heart to people who have never demonstrated that they know how to hold it. But understand this: your worth does not decrease because someone fails to recognize it. Your worth was never waiting for another person's permission. What must change is not the value inside you, but the behaviors that quietly communicate that your value is negotiable. Because every time you abandon your boundary to keep someone comfortable, you teach them something. Every time you chase someone who has made it clear they are willing to lose you, you teach them something. Every time you shrink your voice so another person can feel larger, you teach them something. And every time you choose yourself without hatred, without revenge, without needing applause, you teach them something entirely different. You teach them that access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. You teach them that kindness does not mean weakness. You teach them that love does not require self-abandonment. And most importantly, you begin teaching yourself that you are no longer willing to betray your own dignity just to be accepted. So before you ask why people treat you a certain way, pause, look at what your actions have been saying. Because sometimes your silence has been speaking louder than your words. And sometimes the moment you change what you quietly permit is the moment the entire relationship begins to change. Your boundaries are the quiet language through which you tell the world how you expect to be treated. They are not walls built to keep everyone out. They are doors with locks, and you are the one who decides who enters, when they enter, and what behavior is acceptable once they arrive. A boundary says, I can love you without losing myself. I can care about you without allowing you to mistreat me. I can understand your pain without making your pain an excuse for hurting me. Many people believe that being kind means being endlessly available. They confuse forgiveness with repeatedly accepting the same disrespect. They think being a good person requires them to tolerate everything, explain themselves constantly, and remain silent when something inside them is screaming that enough is enough. But kindness without boundaries can become self-abandonment. When you continually accept what hurts you, other people may eventually stop seeing their behavior as a violation and begin seeing your tolerance as permission. This is why boundaries matter. They create clarity. If someone speaks to you disrespectfully, and you calmly tell them that you will not continue a conversation under those conditions, you have communicated something powerful. You have said that disagreement is acceptable, but degradation is not. If someone repeatedly cancels plans and expects you to remain endlessly available, choosing not to rearrange your life every time they call teaches them that your time has value. If someone only contacts you when they need something, you do not have to keep proving your generosity by giving more and more. Your boundary does not need to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the strongest boundary is simply walking away. Sometimes it is refusing to explain yourself for the 10th time. Sometimes it is allowing someone to misunderstand you because you have finally realized that peace is more important than convincing them of your goodness. And this is where many people struggle. They fear that setting boundaries will make them seem selfish, difficult, cold, or unloving. They worry that people will leave. But consider what you are actually losing when someone only stays because you have no boundaries. You are not losing a healthy relationship. You are losing an arrangement in which your discomfort was the price of someone else's comfort. The right people may not always like your boundaries, but they will learn to respect them. They will understand that your no is not an attack. Your need for space is not rejection. Your desire for respect is not arrogance. They will not demand that you destroy yourself to prove that you love them. Boundaries also teach you something about yourself. Every time you enforce one, you strengthen your relationship with your own voice. You begin to trust yourself again. You discover that you can survive someone's disappointment. You discover that guilt does not mean you have done something wrong. You discover that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of being honest. Your worth is not determined by how many people you can keep happy. It is revealed in the way you protect what is precious within you. When you begin honoring your limits, you stop begging others to recognize your value and start demonstrating that you recognize it yourself, and that is where respect begins to grow. What you tolerate repeatedly can become the language people use to understand your limits. Not because you deserve disrespect, and not because another person's behavior defines your value, but because repeated tolerance can create patterns. When someone learns that they can cross a boundary, apologize briefly, and return to the same behavior without consequence, they may eventually stop seeing the boundary as real. They begin to believe that your discomfort will never become a decision. This is one of the quietest ways people teach others what treatment they will accept. You may say that you want respect, but if you repeatedly remain available to someone who only calls when they need something, your actions are communicating something different. You may say that dishonesty hurts you, but if you continually forgive deception without requiring change, the pattern may continue. You may say that you are tired of being taken for granted, but if you keep giving everything while receiving almost nothing, people may never understand that something must change. This does not mean you should become harsh or unforgiving. It means forgiveness should not require you to repeatedly volunteer for the same wound. There is a difference between giving someone another chance and giving them unlimited access to hurt you. Sometimes you tolerate certain behaviors because you are afraid of what will happen if you finally say enough. You fear losing the relationship. You fear being called selfish. You fear being alone. You fear that choosing yourself will make someone believe you no longer care. So you keep adjusting. You keep explaining. You keep making excuses. You keep telling yourself that tomorrow will be different. But tomorrow often becomes another version of yesterday when nothing changes to today. Your tolerance can become a cage when you mistake endurance for love. You can spend years trying to prove that you are patient, understanding, loyal, and compassionate, while quietly becoming exhausted from carrying a relationship that should have been carried by two people. There comes a moment when love must include discernment. You can understand why someone behaves badly without agreeing to remain available for it. You can recognize another person's wounds without allowing those wounds to become weapons against you. You can care about someone deeply and still decide that their behavior has consequences. The consequence does not have to be punishment. Sometimes it is simply distance. Sometimes it is reduced access. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is refusing to participate in the same argument, the same manipulation, or the same cycle one more time. When your actions finally match your words, people receive a clearer message. Your kindness remains, but it is no longer permission. Your forgiveness remains, but it is no longer an invitation to repeat the offense. Your love remains, but it is no longer proof that you will abandon yourself. And perhaps the most important person who learns from your new standard is you. You begin realizing that you do not have to remain where you are constantly diminished. You do not have to accept crumbs simply because you once called them a feast. You do not have to keep proving that you can survive mistreatment. You are allowed to change the standard. You are allowed to say, "This no longer works for me." You are allowed to walk away from patterns that repeatedly steal your peace, because the moment you stop tolerating what continually breaks your spirit, you begin teaching everyone around you something powerful. Your heart is generous, but your dignity is not negotiable, and your peace is something you are finally willing to protect. The way you speak to yourself becomes the foundation upon which many of your choices are built. Long before another person decides how much respect to give you, there is a voice inside you deciding what you believe you deserve. If that voice constantly tells you that you are not enough, that you should be grateful for whatever attention you receive, or that you must earn love by pleasing everyone, you may begin accepting treatment that quietly contradicts your deepest value. You can become so accustomed to criticizing yourself that disrespect from others no longer feels unfamiliar. Someone dismisses your feelings, and instead of asking why they treated you that way, you ask yourself whether you were too sensitive. Someone ignores your effort, and instead of recognizing their lack of appreciation, you wonder whether you should have done more. Someone repeatedly hurts you, and instead of protecting your heart, you search for reasons to excuse their behavior. This is how self-talk can excuse their behavior. This is how self-talk can shape your relationships. When you constantly tell yourself that you are difficult to love, you may become terrified of asking for what you need. When you tell yourself that you are replaceable, you may desperately compete for someone's attention. When you convince yourself that being alone would be unbearable, you may remain in situations where your presence is barely valued. But there is another way to speak to yourself. You can begin with simple truths. I deserve respect. My feelings matter. I do not have to earn basic kindness. I can make mistakes without becoming worthless. I can be rejected without being destroyed. I can disappoint someone and still be a good person. These are not empty affirmations. They are reminders that your identity cannot be reduced to another person's approval. The world will sometimes give you reasons to doubt yourself. Someone will criticize you. Someone will misunderstand you. Someone will choose another person. Someone will walk away. Someone will fail to recognize everything you brought into their life. These experiences can hurt deeply, but they do not have the authority to define your worth. You must learn to separate rejection from worth. A person can reject your presence without proving that you are unworthy of love. A person can dislike your decision without proving that your decision is wrong. A person can misunderstand your intentions without making you a bad person. When you develop a healthier relationship with yourself, you stop needing every person to validate you. You can hear criticism without immediately collapsing. You can receive disagreement without feeling erased. You can walk away from someone without spending every night wondering what was wrong with you, and that changes the way you behave. You stop chasing people who repeatedly withdraw. You stop begging for explanations from people who have already shown you their intentions. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places where your presence is constantly questioned. You become less interested in proving that you are worthy and more interested in living as though you already know it. This does not mean becoming arrogant. Knowing your worth does not require believing you are better than anyone else. It simply means refusing to believe you are less than anyone else. Speak to yourself with the same compassion you would offer someone you love. Correct yourself without destroying yourself. Hold yourself accountable without turning every mistake into a verdict against your character. Because when the voice inside you becomes kinder, stronger, and more honest, you begin making different choices. And eventually, your life starts reflecting the respect you have finally learned to give yourself. Your time, attention, and energy are among the most valuable things you possess, because once they are given away, you cannot retrieve them. Money can be earned again. Possessions can be replaced. Opportunities can return in another form. But the hours you spend exhausted, explaining yourself to people who do not listen, chasing those who do not reciprocate, and worrying about things you cannot control are hours of your life that will never come back. This is why the way you distribute your attention quietly tells people what you consider valuable. If you are constantly available to everyone, people may begin assuming that your time has no boundaries. If you answer every message immediately, cancel your plans whenever someone needs you, and abandon your own priorities whenever another person demands attention, you may unintentionally communicate that everyone else's needs belong above your own. Being available is not the problem. Generosity is not the problem. Caring is not the problem. The problem begins when your generosity requires you to repeatedly neglect yourself. There is a difference between being supportive and becoming someone else's permanent emergency service. There is a difference between loving someone and making their emotions your full-time responsibility. There is a difference between being present for people and allowing every person access to your peace. You do not have to respond to everything immediately. You do not have to explain every decision. You do not have to attend every argument. You do not have to solve every problem. You do not have to make yourself emotionally exhausted simply because someone else refuses to manage their own emotions. When you become intentional with your attention, something changes. You begin noticing who genuinely values your presence and who simply enjoys having access to it. You notice who asks how you are doing without needing anything from you. You notice who respects your busy moments, your silence, your boundaries, and your need for rest, and sometimes what you discover is uncomfortable. Some people do not miss you. They miss what you provide. They miss your availability. They miss your advice. They miss your constant reassurance. They miss knowing that no matter how carelessly they treated you, you would still be there. This realization can hurt, but it can also set you free. Because your attention should not be handed out simply because someone knows how to demand it. Your energy should be invested where it can grow, where it is appreciated, where it contributes to something meaningful. Protecting your energy does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming intentional. You can still be generous without being endlessly accessible. You can still love people without answering every call. You can still help without becoming responsible for everyone's life. You can still care deeply while understanding that your own needs deserve a place at the table. There will always be people who want more from you. More time, more explanations, more favors, more emotional labor, more chances. But you must learn that more is not always the same as meaningful. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pause before giving. Ask yourself, do I genuinely want to give this, or am I afraid of what will happen if I don't? That question can reveal a great deal. When you begin protecting your time, your attention, and your energy, you are not declaring that other people do not matter. You are declaring that you matter too. And when you finally treat your own peace as something precious, people begin to understand that access to your time is not automatic, your attention is not unlimited, and your energy is not something they are entitled to consume. There comes a moment when you realize that you have spent too much of your life trying to convince people of something they were never willing to see. You explained your intentions. You defended your heart. You showed up again and again. You gave more chances, more patience, more understanding, hoping that eventually someone would recognize the value you had been carrying all along. But your worth was never something that needed to be argued into existence. The need to prove yourself can quietly exhaust you. You begin measuring your value by how much you can accomplish, how many people need you, how quickly someone responds to your messages, or whether someone chooses you over somebody else. You begin performing for approval instead of living from conviction. You become so focused on being understood that you forget you are allowed to walk away from people committed to misunderstanding you. But there is freedom in realizing that you do not have to convince everyone. You do not have to explain every boundary. You do not have to defend every decision. You do not have to make someone understand your heart. before you are allowed to protect it. Sometimes your actions can say what hundreds of explanations cannot. When you stop chasing someone, your silence can communicate that you will no longer compete for basic attention. When you stop accepting disrespect, your distance can communicate that your dignity matters. When you stop responding to every provocation, your calm can communicate that your peace is more valuable than winning an argument. This is not about becoming distant or pretending not to care. It is about becoming secure enough that your decisions no longer depend on receiving applause. People may misunderstand you. Let them. Someone may call you selfish because you finally said no. Someone may call you arrogant because you stopped begging for approval. Someone may say you have changed because you no longer tolerate what you once tolerated. Maybe you have changed. Maybe that is the point. Growth often looks like betrayal to people who benefited from the version of you that had no boundaries. When you stop proving your worth, you begin choosing differently. You choose relationships where effort moves in both directions. You choose conversations where honesty does not require punishment. You choose environments where you can breathe instead of constantly performing. You choose rest without feeling guilty. You choose yourself without needing to announce that you have chosen yourself. And slowly, something inside you becomes quieter. You no longer need to be the most impressive person in the room. You no longer need everyone to understand your story. You no longer need to win every disagreement. You become comfortable letting your life provide the evidence. Your consistency becomes evidence. Your character becomes evidence. Your boundaries become evidence. Your peace becomes evidence. Your ability to leave what diminishes you becomes evidence. The people who truly recognize your worth will not require you to perform for their approval. They will notice the way you live, the way you treat others, the way you honor yourself, and the way you remain grounded when nobody is applauding. That is the quiet power of self-respect. It does not scream. It does not threaten. It does not threaten. It does not demand recognition. It simply makes different choices, and eventually, you understand that your greatest responsibility is not convincing the world that you are worthy. It is refusing to live in ways that make you forget that you are.